Dr. Jazz.
When Sonny came to Japan, he didn't have the mohawk.
Oh shit!
This mohawk picture.
Yeah, sure.
So the Japanese didn't think it was Sonny Rollins. They thought it was a fake. So he had to cut his hair off again while he was in Japan to get the mohawk back to look like the poster.
Oh shit, man. Yeah, it's like I love these old posters. I mean, if you can still get them, probably somewhere, they're amazing.
They're around, I guess.
Yeah, it's just so much.
You're in New York, Samo?
No. I'm in Europe. I'm in Slovenia, former Yugoslavia.
Oh, Slovenia.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
You ever played here?
Okay. Let me see. In
Ljubljana, maybe, right?
Yeah, I did. I may have been with Buddy Rich.
Yeah.
Probably. A year in the late '60s, early '70s. I'm not sure because there were different regimes in faction. Let me see.
Sure.
In Yugoslavia.
Maybe Belgrade or Zagreb or.
Yes, I think I did at one point.
Right?
I can't remember where it was. I mean, I remember we played in Prague. That's for sure. I mean, I know we did that, and I can't remember where else we were. We were on a tour with I think George Wein at the time.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I can't. So far back, it's like. Well, I know it had to be with Buddy Rich if I did it. I never did it with Elvin. I don't think.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, it's like many of the guys. I remember I did this talk with Liebman, and he was like, "Yeah, man, we were in Ljubljana in 1971." I was like, "Man, it's like crazy stuff."
Oh, wait a minute.
So back.
Ljubljana. I think I played Ljubljana. Yeah, I think I remember that.
I mean, I know Elvin played in Ljubljana like twice.
I think I did.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I did. Maybe I did it with Elvin. Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at my itineraries and see if I was there.
You still have them?
But I joined a lot of them. Oh, sure, yeah.
Oh,
not all of them.
Wow.
Many of them. Yeah. I joined Elvin in '75 though, so it may have been. Yeah, that sounds familiar to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
But Pat, I mean, thanks for taking the time. I did this talk with your brother, with Joe, and I've always been a fan of your playing for such a long time. I got passed it on like years ago.
Oh, jeez.
And I loved it. Just the playing, man, and the tunes and like the band. It's killing. And
that finally went to CD in Japan somewhere. Somebody sent me a copy of it. It's always been vinyl. I still have many vinyl copies.
Yeah.
But it went to CD. Somebody told me that, and they sent me a copy of it. So, Gene Perla sent it to me.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
That was my first. That was the first record date I ever did, and of course it was vinyl. I had two different bands. I had Richie Beirach on some and Don Thompson on others, because we had to do it in different periods when I was in New York.
How did you decide? How did you decide to do that one? I mean, what was the main trigger that?
Well, it was Gene Perla. Gene Perla, actually, he was coming into Toronto quite a bit. I've been living in Toronto at that time, right? So I moved here in '74. So Gene was coming in, and he's actually the one that got me the job with Elvin, because, I mean, Gene and I were at Berkeley together, but I've met Elvin in 1973 in Ronnie Scott's, and they came and sat in with Buddy Rich's band, and he offered me the gig. They offered me the gig. They said Lehman was leaving. Would you want to do it? And I said, well, right now, Buddy, I'm with Buddy's band, and I really like what I'm doing. So then, they took my number, and then I went, things happened. And then in February of the next year of '74, Buddy decided he's going to break the band up. So I finally, after 7 years, the band broke up. I left. I moved to Toronto. And of course, Elvin lost my contact number. And then Gene Perla was coming into town, into Toronto, and he knew he had some friends here. And we had a jam session, like a session somewhere at somebody's house. He said, Elvin's been trying to get in touch with you. And so, he's been at, he doesn't have, I said, here's my new phone number, right? So, and he said, and I've been wanting to do this record date with you, because he was a lot of Toronto musicians. So I used Don Thompson on it. And So then Elvin called me like a week or so later and asked me to join the band because he'd been trying to find me, but he didn't know where the hell I was. So that's how.
Wow.
And so Gene Perla was kind of instrumental in getting me and then he hooked me up my first record date. And because I had done stuff before where I wanted to do a record date, but at that time it was a different era. Nobody wanted any young guys. They weren't signing any young people.
Really?
And so I had at one point I had a thing hooked up where this was later when Elvin was with me. I had talked to Buddy Rich and Louis Belson and Elvin to play on a record of mine, all different tracks, because I had worked with all three of them. And I went into the record. It was the record company in New York. Joe Fields used to own it anyway. And he said, "Nah, even with those three guys on the record tape, they weren't interested. Weren't interested in signing any young guys. He said, if it was a Frank Foster or somebody who had some legs behind them." And then the whole thing flipped around when Wynton Marsalis and the young guys came in. Then I was over the hill, and I couldn't get the record dates because I was too old. So I was right in that crux. Anyway, Gene hooked me up with that first record date.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. Wow. How was I wanted to, since you mentioned Elvin, I mean, I wanted to ask you about Elvin later, but how was the first gig or rehearsal? You remember that?
Well, I was telling somebody about that the other day because he called me and he called me and said, "Can you come down?" The first gig was the Village Vanguard. He said, "Can you come down and do the Vanguard next week?" It was in the middle of the week, like Wednesday. He said, "Come down on a Friday. We'll rehearse. So fly into New York, check into a hotel." I got the hotel. So I flew in on Friday. I called him. He said, "Yeah, I can't rehearse today." He said, "Let's rehearse tomorrow, Saturday." I called him back on Saturday. "I can't rehearse today. Something about the plaster coming down in the apartment." Then Sunday, and then, he kept putting it off. And then on Monday, he said, "Just show up at the Vanguard. You can play." So I showed up at the Vanguard. Now I knew the Coltrane tunes that he had done, what they were playing, but I didn't know any of the other new material. But he had hired Frank Foster to be in the band, to be there to play the gig with me. So Foster was there, thank God, to teach me the tunes in the kitchen. He would, like Simone, he would play that, and Three Card Molly, and he would teach me that. I was pretty good at picking up stuff quickly, and so I would play those. And then they do Mr. PC or Bessie's Blues or something that I knew, and then a ballad would be ballads that I knew. And so Foster got me through the first week of the Village Vanguard. And meanwhile, I was taking meticulous notes. I was taping, I think, at the time, too, so I could go home and write down what the tunes were. And, Foster had a couple of lead sheets that he gave me. So and then we left for Europe, like right after that, for like a month tour, I think. And then went to Sweden, I know. And then I may have been, been on that tour where we went to Ljubljana or some other place. But that was the first, my first, and it was only a quartet. There was no other saxophone player. Once we left the Village Vanguard, Frank he stayed in New York, and I was on my own.
Oh, wow.
So I had to be, I was the only saxophone. It was me and Roland Prince and David Williams would be the first quartet that I went out with.
Wow.
And, no piano, just guitar.
How was the tour like? Touring with Elvin in the 70s, like
Elvin was not really hooked at that point, was not locked in to major, he was with Wim Wicht and Gabby Kleinschmidt, who were two of the promoters over there. And the touring was not easy, right? We were in vans, mostly vans, and small hotels, pensions, and those kinds of things. It was hard to do, and at some point we would sleep in the van, on the way to it. It got better. But see, when he was with Liebman, and when Liebman and that band with Grossman, they were hooked into George Wein, right? So the accommodations and the touring was a little bit better. When he went with Wim Wicht, then it got a little bit more difficult because they were just trying to get off the ground again with a new band.
Yeah.
So it took a while before we got, fairly good. And it was always train, everybody in the band carrying the drums and rolling the drums. You know how it is in Europe. You go down the train station, you go on your knees, you come up on another platform, usually by steps and no elevator. You're carrying drums up and your own suitcase and your horn. And I get the Euro pass, and you're away. So that's kind of what it was.
Wow.
But it got better in the later years. Don't forget, I was with Elvin from about 75 to about 87, off and on, right?
That's a long one.
At first I was with him quite a bit, right? And then when I came back to Toronto and I got a full-time teaching job, other guys went out,
Sure.
well, Ravi Coltrane was out, and there's a whole bunch of different tenor players. And then he would call me if there was something where somebody couldn't cover. I'd fly down to New York and help him out. And then in the last 2 years of his life, I went back
Yeah.
because I got a sabbatical and I got a reduced workload from when I was teaching. So just before Elvin passed away, I went out, his 75th birthday, I think. I went out for that period, that tour, and then he was gone. I mean, the last gig I did with him was at the Jazz Bakery in Los Angeles in the June of the year before he passed away.
Oh.
And I was playing with, well, Delphio and myself were on there. And I remember Ralph Moore coming down to sit in with us. And, we were trying to pace it so we wouldn't tire Elvin out. We could tell he was getting tired, toward the end. And when I left that gig, that was finished, I told my wife, I said, I don't think we're going to see him again, because that was my last thing. It was in a June or July of the summer, and then I went home and I never really saw him again. I would talk on the phone and call them in New York and talk to Keiko, but I never saw him again after that.
Wow.
But he was, and it was. I kind of questioned the fact that he did go out after me, but he wanted to play. According to Keiko, she said she couldn't stop him. He wanted to keep going, so I guess he went out and did some other gigs that were kind of questionable. I don't.
Yeah. How was it like in the beginning when you started playing?
Well, in the beginning,
musically, I mean, like for you developing the music with him, I mean, with that band.
Well, he gave me a chance to write. First we were playing the tunes that were there, and then I started introducing some of my own material at the time. And he let me, just write as much as I wanted, and he would record them and play them. Some of the stuff never got recorded. We would rehearse it, but he was always interested in having, people write new material for him. So that was, and he was very, always encouraging. It was one of the greatest musical experiences because there were no guidelines. It was just basically, when I joined Elvin's band, he only told me two things. He said, "You're not playing long enough, and you got to take your time to develop your solos," because I had come from big bands where you jump right in and you have to start hitting it. And he said, you got to play longer solos. He says, "We're only playing 5 tunes a set, maybe, so you got to take time to develop it and develop your solo." And so that took a little bit of, getting used to again, because I had, of course, had done it years before that when I was in Berkeley doing small groups. But you do 7 years on a big band, you kind of get, trained to kind of right off the jump, just basically, turning on the hot button.
Well,
and it was great. I mean, I learned so much about my own time sense,
for sure.
Relaxing with his time, which was so different, from Buddy Rich's. Buddy Rich's was always, and bass drum, dum, 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 which was great. I mean, he always had a great feel, and the energy was there. And Elvin's was really relaxed, triplet, blocka, very loose. So in order to, matter of fact, Dave Liebman, that title "Up Loose" on my first record, I got it from Dave Liebman, because he told me. Yeah, Dave Liebman said, he goes, "Man, you went from Uptight," which was one of Buddy Rich's tunes that he recorded, to "Up Loose." And I said, "Oh yeah." So I named it "Up Loose" after Dave Liebman. His quote,
Beautiful, yeah.
But no, he was fun to play with. Like, never really told me how to play or what to play. And then we started doing. I was kind of really afraid of doing it, but I remember we were playing a prison in San Francisco. Elvin played a lot of prisons. We did a lot of prisons because he was, at one point he was incarcerated in Lexington, right? So he always felt he'd give back to the prisoners. So we would play Attica and Walpole. These are all major prisons in the United States. And we were playing a prison in San Francisco. And then we went back to the promoter's house, and we were sitting in the kitchen, or we were standing at the counter, I can remember. And he turned to me and said, "I want to start playing Love Supreme." I said, "Oh, I don't want to play." Nobody ever played, nobody touched that. Nobody would ever touch that. I said, geez. He said, well, let's think about that. I thought about it. So I came home and I started researching it. And I said, okay. I said, well, we can put the first two movements together, acknowledgement and resolution. So we rehearsed it. Boy, reluctantly, I played it. I think we did it at the Vanguard. Then we started doing it in Japan. And nobody ever touched that music, ever recorded it until Elvin did it and we started doing it. Then all of a sudden people started, realizing, oh, we can
Holy
play
Grail.
this stuff.
Yeah.
But I was really terrified of doing that, especially when I wouldn't do it with McCoy. We played at one time. It was me and McCoy and Elvin and Richard Davis. We had a little quartet that we traveled, and we wouldn't do those tunes. I didn't want to do any of that stuff with McCoy because it was so hard to not play in that style, right?
Sure.
I mean, you hear Elvin's drums behind you, and then McCoy's doing the fourth. You think
that's scary, man.
I'm going to try to play like Joe Henderson or Sonny Rollins. I mean, you get sucked into that train thing, which I could do at the time. I was really kind of into it. So he got me, he got me on that one. But he let me do a lot of my own tunes. Delfio did some of his tunes when I went back out with that band. Eric Lewis was the pianist. At one point, he wrote some stuff, and so he let the players write things for him. And I always tried to write around the drums, so I tried to incorporate the drums on the tunes that I wrote, so that he would feel like he had something in there to kind of add to the composition.
That's beautiful. How was McCoy like? Did you?
Oh, he was such a great. He was so nice. He was a sweet guy. He would love to hang out, and he would show me. I'd ask him questions about voicings, and I remember asking him about Naima. I said, I said, what, McCoy? I said, everybody. What do you play?
What's your instrument? I play guitar.
Okay, so you probably see if you play Naima, you'll see that.
Yeah, sure.
When you get to those chords that go down.
Yep.
When you get to here, normally they put a dominant 7 chord with a plus 11, because, but he said no. He says it's a major chord over that wrong pedal note, right? So it's I got to think what key I'm in now for a minute.
It's like
we'll say.
E flat or something.
I think so. So whatever it is, he said whatever the dominant chord is, it's really the major 7 chord on the 7th of that dominant. So if you have an E flat 7 chord, he's playing a D flat major over that whatever the pedal is. He said those were the original chord changes. So you have that clash between the root, the pedal, and that. He said, but most people looked at that and they said, if we take this major 7 chord and flat the 5th, that's a piano voicing for the dominant chord, right? So D flat major 7 with a flat 5 is an E flat 7 dominant voicing without the root. So that's how they kind of justified those dominant chords. But he would give me those kinds of lessons.
That's amazing.
And he'd like to hang out in the daytime. I remember one time I was going into, we were in Los Angeles, and I had rented a car, and I was going into downtown LA. We were staying in Hermosa Beach, and I was going to go in and buy some reeds. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going down to Stein on Vine, which was a big music store." I said, "I'm going down to across from the Musicians Union. There's a music store. I'm going to get some reeds." You go, "Oh, can I come along and hang out?" I said, "Sure, yeah." So we went. We drove into LA. I mean, he was nice. He was just, and he always liked telling stories. He was a great guy to hang with. I miss both those guys. Those guys were just so nice to me,
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's nice when I mean, you as a saxophone player to be playing with those two guys but still having your voice. I mean, I find that fascinating when I listen to the Elvin stuff. It's still you. Like when I listen to your solo stuff and Elvin, you could have easily assimilated, like you said, like go into the Coltrane mode, but.
Yeah, I tried to not always do it, but there were certain times he would play for. I mean, I could turn it on too. I mean, I knew how to I could kind of trap him into doing stuff that I wanted if I would, that I knew he would do if I did certain things with skips and stuff. I mean, it's because of that, all the listening that I had done to it. But no, he was really good about allowing me to stretch and to develop my style, because it took me, to come from a big band where you only play, if you're lucky, get 32 bars or a couple of little features most of the time. And now you're stretching out for a whole night and usually 8 to 10 minutes on a song. So
That's heavy.
he helped me develop that aspect of my playing too.
Yeah.
And we had guitars most of the time when I first came on. It would be Jean-Paul Borelli or Marvin Horn. Sure. Marvin Horn was guitarist on there. Schofield, so he came on for certain things. There were other kinds of guys that were coming in and out, but mostly those three guys were and then later we went to piano with Fumio Karashima and Anthony Wanzi and some of the other guys. I mean, many guys went through the band. When I left, there were a whole bunch of New York people that were going out with them. Carlos McKinney, a bunch of guys that.
Interesting.
We had guitar all the time. Rio Kawasaki was the guitar. He was for a long time. Rio and I were on that gig.
It's interesting that he chose the guitar. Right? I mean, instead of piano. Yeah. I mean, I guess just to create his own line, probably. Or
well, the hardest thing for me with guitar was the tuning. If the guy's using if he's using thin gauge strings, and the tuning would go out quite a bit, you have to, they don't constantly have to be retuning. Otherwise, it would be, I'd be trying to find it like that. That was the main thing, I never had that problem with Roland Prince. He was kind of like a Wes Montgomery, that solid, thicker sound. When the guys came on, I guess Rio and John Paul, they were kind of thinner sounds. They listened more to rock, and that was their style. Guitar could have had sometimes the tuning was a little bit of an issue, but we had guitar for quite a bit of the time I was with him. And of course, Toronto here, this is a great guitar town. Oh, there's so many, Lauren Lofsky and Reg Schwager and Ed Brecker was here for years. There's huge guitar community here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, you mentioned Buddy Rich before. You played with some of the best drummers ever. Like, how did you get the Buddy Rich gig, by the way?
The Buddy Rich gig was I was in Berkeley, and my ensemble teacher was Jimmy Mosier, who was an alto saxophone in Boston, who led his own big band with Paul Fontaine. And I was in my 4th year at Berkeley. I was in his big band, and we were hanging out one night. We would rehearse on a Fridays, and then after the Friday, we'd go down to a local pub, and we'd be hanging out, having some beers, and we were drinking. And Jimmy said, he said, you've been in school too long, because I was starting my 4th year. He said, you should be going on the road. He goes, he was drinking, so we were so he said, there's an opening with Buddy Rich. He goes, I'm going to make a call to New York and get you that job. I said, okay. So Monday morning came around, and I thought, it was all talk. I said, Jimmy, where's that gig with Buddy Rich? He said, quit all your classes and leave for New York on Friday. You got the gig, and you got to start. You got to go. So you got to fly home with all your stuff from Boston to Rochester, dump your stuff, get your stuff together and fly to New York, which I did. Now, when I went to New York, I was lucky enough to get there a week before. They brought me in a week before to rehearse with the saxophone section. And the reason being was that my friend Ernie Watts had taken the job about 6 months before me playing lead alto. Or second alto, then he got the lead chair, so he wanted to rehearse it. And then another alto player from Berkeley had already been on there, Charlie Owens, and so those two were on. Jay Corey was the lead tenor player. I was on doing the 4th, and they had a new baritone player, so he talked Buddy into getting me to fly down early so he could rehearse the saxophones for a week. So I got a chance to rehearse all of the parts by with just the saxophones without the lead tenor player, because Jay Corey wouldn't make the rehearsals. And we did that for about a week, and then I never met Buddy. I went to the airport on the Sunday where we were supposed to fly to Minneapolis. And I get to the airport, and Ernie says, Buddy, here's the new tenor player. And I said, hey, how you doing? That's it. So I just was hello, shake your hand, and got on the plane. And, I had been rehearsing what they call the 4th tenor book, which was the 2nd tenor book, right? So we get to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Jay Corey, the lead tenor player, misses the flight.
Oh, shit.
and we're doing a big concert with Frank Sinatra and Nancy Sinatra and the Fifth Dimension and Milton Berle, and it was a birthday party for Vice President Hubert Humphrey in this huge auditorium, and Morgana King, and we had to play West Side Story, and I had to play the tenor solo, which I'd never even seen
Oh,
before.
shit, man.
Well, anyway, we got through that night. And then Jay Corey finally joined us from New York, and then that was it. And then a month later, I was doing a tour of Japan. So that was in October. Wow. And at the end of November, we flew to Japan and did a month in We went to Hong Kong, Taipei, Japan, Bangkok. You know, it was a whole. And we ended up in Hawaii, and then we came back and went for a month into Las Vegas into the Sands Hotel.
Man.
Buddy used to do location work, and that's one of the reasons I took the gig with Buddy, because I had been offered also. My friend Lynn Viviano, the trumpet player, he got me on. And at the same time I got the call from Buddy, a couple of days later, Lynn called me and said, "Hey," he goes, "there's an opening on Woody's band," and I had to choose. I said, "Gee," and I looked at it and I said, "You know what? Woody was doing all of these one-nighters, you know, Moose Halls and Elks Hall and all these dances, and Buddy was doing location work. We'd do a week here, a month there, you know." So I said,
that's crazy.
And he was doing all the high-profile gigs, and so I took that, and thank God I did. It was great.
Wow. But you were located then while you were with Buddy?
I was living
in New York,
when I was upstate New York, near Rochester, New York. South of it is a small town named Mount Morris, and that was my hometown. So all my stuff was stored there. So when I was on Buddy Rich's band, I never had a place. I never had an apartment because we were out on the road 300, plus days a year until I got married in 70. When I got married in 71, then I got an apartment, my wife and I, in Rochester. But eventually I moved to Toronto. Once Buddy broke the band up, I moved to Canada in 1974.
But did you ever consider going to New York at that time? I mean,
I had an offer to go there. I had a chance to buy a building in New York for real cheap. I should have, but you know what? We had a baby coming, and I just didn't want. I wanted to have the child born close to the both sets of grandparents. And the only time in Rochester, New York, there was nothing happening. But my wife was from Toronto, and I knew all those musicians in Toronto because I had played with them out in Vancouver with Buddy Rich's band. And we used to go to Toronto quite a bit. So I figured, here's a major city in the Northeast where I can work as a musician, because there were clubs here going on. There was studio work. There was all kinds of recording. This is close to 45-minute flight to New York City. And I could have, and a 3-hour drive to my parents and a 1-hour drive to my wife's mother. So I figured that would be the location. That's why we moved, basically, because children were coming, and I felt, this would be the place for me.
The quality of living, and everything.
Well, also, don't forget, probably like you have in your country, it's socialized medicine.
Yeah.
Do you have that same? Yeah.
Yeah, we have it in Slovenia. We had it, and Yugoslavia also, but the States obviously not. Yeah, sure.
No, nothing. So I mean,
I mean,
I was just talking. Jerry Berganzi was just talking. He pays $26,000 a year or something.
It's crazy.
To just medical.
It's crazy.
So, I mean, here I had the child. No, nothing. Any kind of medical stuff. I mean, I don't know why they don't live like that down there. I can't understand it. I just can't. Anyway.
Yeah.
It makes life so much easier. Just think about it. How much easier your life is to not work. When I lived down in the States, that was always in the back of my mind. My father always used, because before I moved to Canada, he said, "Don't forget to keep up with we used to call it Blue Cross." He goes, "You got to make sure you make that payment every month. You don't want to miss that payment. If you lose it, you're gonna, they'll lose the house, and it's terrible to be thinking with that over your head, and you're trying to think about music.
I agree.
Get it.
Yeah. Pat, can I ask you? You mentioned Berkeley, and before, and when you went to Berkeley, how? I mean, now it's like a conglomerate in jazz education. But how was it back then? Like when you entered?
Well, it was so different. See, I had come from a school system, the New York State school system, and you have to realize that back in the '60s, the schools did not want jazz around at all. You know,
Yeah,
some of the schools, you know, so, I mean, the school, you know, especially in the system I was in, I felt I was really not appreciated in the first school I went to. So I left and I went and worked for a year in a factory, tried to earn enough money, and my father helped me. And as soon as I got to Berkeley the first day, I walked around and looked in the windows, and I could see the practice rooms, and there were quintets and guys practicing jazz. And a lot of the schools, you weren't allowed to practice jazz in the practice room.
Wow.
You know, I mean, you have to think about the Eastman School of Music now has one of the most prestigious music programs. But in the '60s, if they even found out you were playing jazz outside, and on a Saturday night, they would throw you out of the program or ask you to stop doing it. I mean, this is when I went to Potsdam, which is where I went the first time. The big band could not rehearse on campus.
Wow.
You had to rehearse, you know, in one of the sorority or, you know, fraternity houses in order to get a big band going. Anyways, it's a different era, and now all of those schools have very good, you know, jazz programs.
Yeah.
It's just a different era, that's all.
Yeah.
But Berkeley was great. I mean, everything from the first week, I just learned so much from the first week. I mean, they started you right. First of all, the classes all started at 10 o'clock in the morning. Basically, my class was at 10. Now I think it's earlier, but back then they figured all these guys are working musicians. They don't want to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. So our classes started at 10. Well, private lessons were great, and everything was hands-on. I mean, it was basically training. It was more like a trade school because they were training you to be a player, how to write arrangements, how to double on your woodwinds, you know, how to read, how to play, you know, rhythms and all of that stuff. And then there was work on the weekends. Even if you were a student, you would get, you know, asked to play in some kind of a band, and so that was going on too, which is something I never had in the other places where I went, you know. Yeah. So it was. And the teachers were great. And all of them, when you have to figure, were all guys who were professional players. You know, there was nobody there that was, you know, I don't think anybody had a doctorate back then. All of them were just musicians who had been out performing, you know, Charlie Mariano and Ray Santisi and Herb Pomeroy and Joe Viola. They were all just performing musicians. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, how did you proceed? You said, you know, they taught you how to write music and arrange. Like, what was your usually the process when writing music? You know, like I don't know, Little Lady, Section 8, whatever the tunes you wrote for Elvin or other tunes for. How did you proceed usually? Did it come fast with you, like when writing music?
Well, no, yeah, the first tune I ever wrote that was of any consequence was the thing I recorded with Elvin called "Familiar Ground." I think that's on one of those tunes. I think Brother John or something. That was the first tune. I mean, basically, I think I was listening to Charles Lloyd at that time. I mean, first of all, a lot of it came from Berkeley's training because I didn't. When I went to the other schools, they had no idea. It was all, you know, classical training and figured bass and just looking at scores. But with Berkeley, the very first lesson is you went in and you had to write out everything in all the scales in 12 keys, no key signatures, a sharp and a flat next to every note. Write out all the diatonic sevens above, put in all the sharps and flats. So in every key, and then extract 2-5-1, write that out, put the chords up, and put the sharps and flats next to it, and then do it in harmonic, melodic, minor. And then you turned it in, and the poor teacher, this guy had to go through and look up. There's, you know, find one wrong note in your stacked up voicing. But then they did that. Then the next thing, now you start writing for 4 saxophones. Wow. So now it's all clustered voicings. Then we work on drop 2, then different approach, diminished approach. It was all that Berkeley. See, I started out as a performance major. So the performance major were basically guys who were allowed to play their horn and just play and practice and play. And then all these guys, like this in the second week, guys are talking about, the drop 2 voicing. And I said, what is that? I said, well, this is what we're getting in arranging. So I said, man, that's what I want. So I switched from being a performance major to an arranging composition major. Okay. Because they were getting all the theory. And the reason I was hooked on the theory was when I was going to the other school, which was Potsdam State Teachers College, I had Downbeat magazine, which included in it there was a year that they had the thing called the Inner Ear, and they had the Berkeley theory course and arranging thing. They had 4 or 5 lessons, and I just studied those things diligently. So I kind of knew what I was getting into when I went there. And so that kind of helped me. And then, you know, after a while, you learn all of these these different devices, constant structures over a pedal point, which is Ray Santisi had a course there, which is kind of what I'm doing at the bridge of, what am I doing? Oh yeah, that Familiar Ground has got a pedal, G or an A, whatever it is, and I'm using I think Locrian mode against it, but it's all this kind of pedal situation. I do that in Little Lady too, in the turnaround as pedal, try it over pedal point. I mean, that came from Naima, kind of studying Coltrane's, doing the pedal points over Naima. And so those things kind of just led me to researching more composition and just, thinking about tunes in a different way. We were just talking about that in the Jerry Bergazzi's lecture, how he writes. Sometimes he says he'll come up with just a title and work the song around the title of the tune.
Oh,
other times, he'll think of a title and say, I've got to write a melody to fit that. Other times you come up with a little device and then you got to figure out, what they're doing. I mean, I had a composition that I don't think I've recorded it yet. I did one, I was working on 7/4, and I was born in 1944 on the seventh day in the fourth month. So there's 7/4/44. So what I did was I wrote a tune called 7/4/44. And I figured, well, that's great. I've got my birthday, the month, and the year, and the day. Why don't I why don't I get the melody based on my kids' birthdays? So I took my kids' birthdays, got those numbers, and then I said, okay, I'll use my wife's birthday. And so I made the melodies up out of the other birthdays in 7/4. I mean, you get those kinds of ideas that have nothing to do with the notes. And then other times you come up with a little phrase or something that kind of works. I've got a couple of I'm actually rewriting all of my tunes now because that's Drew Billington. I think I got them here. I'm just writing them now in Muse score.
Oh, well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, this is all. Yeah, I'm writing them out. This is Duke Ellington, but and so I'm starting to do my own tunes again because they were just all on crappy lead sheets.
That's good.
So I'm writing them out. Beautiful. I mean, that's one of the things. Like when I retired, when I retired, I took all of my notes from my notebooks and single lesson sheets that I would pass out to players, right? So I would do my own. You've seen the new Brecker book?
No, not yet. I have to.
Yeah, it's all Mike's notes. Basically, here's one of my old. This is like one of my old notebooks, right? With my my practice. You probably do the same thing. So cool. So I mean, all of this stuff here, and so what I did was I took these, and then the stuff I would write for students, lesson plans. And because I'm retired, I figured the first year I did it, I took them all and put them in this, right, so that I have all of my notes.
Yeah,
my diminished, and they're done by diminished. And so now I have all of that stuff. So I have the time now to do this stuff and keep everything, get it organized. Because I taught for so many years, and I would, a student would come in, and I'd write him out a little lesson plan. I'd listen to what he's doing, or he or she, and then I would just say, you should do this, and now I've kind of compiled them into a thing. But Mike Brecker's book now, what they've done is they've taken all of these notes and kind of put them in a nice. Calligraphy. Yeah, it's really interesting to see how I'm looking at it, and I could see where we were all thinking the same thing at around the same time.
How was it like for you since you mentioned Mike? I mean, when I think about the early 70s, and I've spoken to so many guys that were around. There was like Liebman and Brecker and Bob Mintzer and Bob Burkheim and Grossman, and I can just name it.
Well, I played with Mike, and I played with Mike before, but the first time I met him, I was on Buddy Rich's band, and I used to rent a rehearsal studio down on 48th Street, Jake Coven's studios, and it was right next to Manny's Music. And I would go up there, and it was $1 an hour, and I would practice. And then I heard this knock on the door, and it was Mike, and he introduced himself. Now, I knew his brother Randy, but I didn't know him. He had just moved to New York, and he said, he says, I heard you practicing next door. And we said hello, and we talked for a bit, and then from then on, we would, we talked to each other, and I would send him stuff, he would send me stuff. We'd talk through email, and then he would come to class, to do classes here, and I would bring him in to do lectures and stuff. So we got to, come to the house for dinner, and so through the years, we kind of established a little bit of a friendship. Randy and I are pretty close because we worked at Abersold for a long time. Randy was just in town last week, and he's doing well. And so I got to know Mike. I got to play with. Did I play with Bob? I knew Bob Berg. Bob and I knew him quite a bit. I don't think I ever played with Bob. Yeah, Mincer I know. I'm still, we're sending stuff back and forth. But of course, Liebman and I had played together on Elvin's band, and Grossman and I too played and recorded with him. And Steve I knew quite well too, and Dave I know. Dave usually borrows my tenor when he comes to town. He's, but I knew all of those guys. I used to go down to Dave's apartment, and he would play drums, and I'd play tenor. But not as much as all those guys in New York did, because they were constantly doing it. I would be in town for about a week, and I'd go over and hang with them. But nothing is constant as some of the guys who lived around Manhattan. But we knew each other through that, and everybody was kind of doing the same thing, studying, training, studying Joe Henderson. Joe Henderson was a big.
Sure.
And I studied with Joe for over a year, more than a year, I think.
Really?
Off and on.
Oh wow. Yeah. How was that like?
It was good. I mean, I still have the notes. With Joe, it was mostly all bebop scales. He wanted me working on those things, getting that stuff, which was basically probably Barry Harris's stuff at the beginning, really early. I'm talking like 71, which is probably what he studied from Barry Harris when he was living in Detroit. But that's when Joe would comp. He never played saxophone. He just comped the piano, and I would play tunes and run through those different variations of bop scales. And I mean, Joe was he asked at one time. Joe called me and wanted me to join his group. I was with Buddy Rich, and we were talking. I was going to take a lesson. He said he wanted me to join his group on bass clarinet.
Whoa, man!
I said, Joe, I don't play bass clarinet. I said, I can't even. I said, I play clarinet a little bit. I double on it. I started on clarinet, but I said, there's no way. I think Pete Yellen was going to leave, or forget who was doing it. He had this concept that he wanted to have a bass clarinet player. He always coming up with these different front lines, right? I said, no, I don't think that. I don't think that's for me. I think I'll take a pass on that. What I should have done is what everybody else does. Bass clarinet. I can kill that instrument, then run out and buy one.
Did you ever, by the way, see Eric Dolphy play live?
No, I never did. Never saw Dolphy.
Speaking of bass clarinet, that's
no, I never did see Dolphy live. Yeah, he's one of the ones that I missed at the time, because he was living in Europe at that time, I think.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, when the first time I saw Coltrane live would be 63. Oh, 63 with Roy Haynes, McCoy, and
where was that?
Jimmy. That was in Rochester, New York.
Okay.
And then I would see him in Boston at the Jazz Workshop. We'd go to see him there, and we could get in for $1 as a student. So we used to see him there, and then he had different bands. Sometimes I saw the band with two drummers with Rashid Ali, and I saw the one with McCoy, and this classic quartet was there. Sure. Where else did the guys in New York got to see him more than I did, because they he was always at the half note, or the 5-spot, or whatever he played down there. It was the half note, I think, at the time. Birdland, he was at Birdland, but I got to see him practice. We used to go watch Coltrane because because we were Berkeley students. I had a friend of mine who went to Berkeley, was a waiter at the Jazz Workshop. So he would let us into the club in the daytime at the Jazz Workshop. If we ordered a Coke, he would let us sit at the table, and Train was in just around the corner from the piano. And guess what he was playing? Bop scales. Man. He was just going all the way down the dominant chord with the passing seventh.
Yeah.
And he just was playing that. And this was, you're talking like 64.
Wow.
63.
He was playing that, man. Okay.
And he was practicing those, playing that. Oh. And then every once in a while we'd get up and go to the toilet, because you walked by the band room where they had the door open, had a card table full of reeds, and you pretend you're going to the bathroom, and you could walk out and look in and then go back.
That's so funny, man. That's beautiful. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. I think I spoke to Bergonzi once. Like, he said he saw him like at the jazz workshop when he was really
it's the same place.
Yeah,
Jazz
yeah.
workshop. Yeah.
And he said it was just like,
Oh yeah. And I remember one time I had to walk. I was standing way in the back. I got in the standing room only. I was standing way in the back, and he was just in the middle of something that was just like I'm feeling like, oh my God, what? And I had to walk out and go up to the street. I had to take a breath and then come back into the club. He was just like just nailing it. And you have to remember back then that there was like these old microphones. I mean, Jimmy Garrison had a microphone just taped to the bridge of the thing, but the sound system was. I mean, Train was just basically working off that room, which had low ceilings, and it was just the intensity that he got off the natural acoustics of the instrument.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was something else to hear him live and in person. I'm so glad that I got to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, and then getting to play, of course, with Elvin and McCoy and Richard Davis and all.
Yeah, I mean that was I never could see that happening when the first time I saw Coltrane and talked to McCoy. I talked to McCoy down on the street. It was a hot summer, June or July, I remember, and McCoy came downstairs, and the piano they had in the club was a white upright piano, painted white. And later, when I got to work with McCoy, I told him about the first time I saw him. I mentioned the piano, and he remembered it. He said, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. And, amazing. Pat, I wanted to ask you also, you know, we mentioned Pass It On, but like your career as a band leader, how did you progress with that, you know, like, and also now the later years? I mean, I know you worked with Kirk McDonald a lot. I love those records that you guys did. I mean,
yeah, I was with Kirk this afternoon. We said, we're working Tuesday night with Kirk. Kirk and I are doing, the 2 tenor thing on. He has a steady Tuesday. He has a steady Tuesday that he does, and I'm playing with him on this Tuesday. My own thing as a band leader was something I really never pursued it as a career. What happened was gigs would fall in my lap, and then I would put together bands for it, or I would rehearse projects, and then just try to. But I never really pursued trying to get gigs and do all the touring.
You didn't like band leading, or?
Well, no, I like it. I really enjoyed it. It's just that I don't like always having to get the
hustling,
guy. I do, and the hustling for work was something I never really enjoyed doing. I mean, right now you think I'm retired from teaching, so I'm getting offers for stuff, and then once in a while I stopped the club 2 nights ago when I went to see Jerry, and I said I have a trio that I'm working with: drums, bass, and tenor, and I said, can you give me a couple of nights? And he put it down in the calendar. I'm doing that. But I never really had an agent. At one point I had an agent, but they were sending me out as a single to Ireland and places and picking up local rhythm sections. But, but I never really pursued it with that kind of, drive to be a band leader.
Interesting.
And you have to remember that I did, you got to say probably about 27 years of other people's bands with the common Elvin and Buddy. Meanwhile, my own groups when I came back home. So the traveling bug, and then I go to Japan, or was going to Japan quite a bit and recording there just for Japanese consumption. I mean, there's CDs that are out, but they're really hard to get in Canada. But I do that, and they would bring me over with my brother Joe, and we'd do a tour, a small Japanese tour. I'm supposed to be going out in January with my brother Joe and Pete and Tony Levin. I don't know if you know Tony.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Tony's he's been more in the pop.
Wow,
rock field. But we started out he started out as a jazz guy working with Gap Mangione and Chuck Mangioni's band, and my brother Joe. So Tony's idea was he wanted to put together this band called Band of Brothers.
Wow.
So that's supposed to be happening in January, and we're supposed to start a short tour up from LA north and down, just a short 2-week thing. I mean, he's already got offers to do other touring, but I just don't want to do that much touring right now until we figure out what's the direction of the band and where you're going with it. So So that's coming up in January, and I'm doing some writing again. Just starting to
That's
put some
beautiful.
tunes together and digging up some of my old stuff. That's the hardest thing with having a band is rehearsing new material. I mean, it's easy to go in, like I have a gig next Saturday in town with a quartet. I'll probably end up calling more or less standard material or things that we have played together as a rehearsed group, rather than trying to throw something new in front of them and calling a rehearsal just to do one night.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting.
It's difficult, I guess. I'm sure you find the same thing. If you have a set band that you work with all the time,
yeah, no. I mean, usually I call people from the States or a drummer from somewhere.
So I mean, that's what I do. I'll put together stuff. Sometimes I call Randy Brecker up, come up for a week and do a week.
Really? Oh, beautiful.
So then we do that album called Crossing the Line or whatever that was. We would do that project. So that kind of stuff I put together. And then there are bands in town here, like I'm doing a Duke Ellington tribute in September with who am I doing? Neil Swanson and Don Thompson. No drums, just tenor, piano, and
beautiful.
And saxophone. And Neil Swanson and I just did a duo gig, bass and tenor, just playing Donna Lee and bop heads and standards and everything that we know, and Tricotism and Lucky Thompson tunes.
Yeah, beautiful. Are you still planning to record some, to release some?
Well, I'm thinking about this trio that I've been recording. I have some stuff that actually had been recorded a couple of years ago before COVID that I may put out again with my brother Joe and
beautiful.
Neil and Brian Dickinson. It's all stuff ready to go. The problem is finding somebody that wants to do the work and produce it. I could do it myself, I guess, but I just recorded my brother John's big band in New York last month.
Oh, really?
2 months ago. It was in May. We went down and did 2 days in the studio and with his big band for his newest project, which is coming out shortly, I think.
Fantastic.
Joe was on it, Clay Jenkins, a lot of New York musicians. So it's a big band project. My brother John's producing it, and I guess he has a record. I don't know how he does it, but he's got record companies that do his big band. So that'll be coming out shortly. So I'm doing some recording and keeping that busy. I'll work with the symphony in town every once in a while. They'll come in and they'll have certain projects where they add a saxophone, and I'll do that. And otherwise, I'm practicing as much as I can.
Wow, man, that's amazing.
So I've got so much stuff here on this. I got Lester Young solos that I'm analyzing. I've got Warren Marsh material here. Old sheet music, learning the verses to all these old tunes. Many different projects in my mind that I'm kind of trying to tackle. I'm just trying to keep active and doing it.
That's amazing. Yeah, man, that's amazing. It's so nice to see you so full of energy when you talk. It's so beautiful. That's fantastic.
I'm almost 80. I'll be 80 in next April. So I mean, I have to. You got to keep your health. That's the main thing. Is to keep. I've got to exercise every day. I got to do some kind of exercise that keeps your balance and your muscle mass. If you just got your breathing, you've got to concentrate on that kind of stuff. So it's important. You want to keep going and you want to stay healthy. So that's my goal.
That's the most important.
I love the fact that Sonny's looking at me over here.
Yeah, I love this poster. It's so cool.
Yeah,
I bought it like years ago in New York. I remember rolling it up and traveling over.
Have you got the book yet? The big thick book?
No,
Saxophone Colossus. Oh,
no.
You gotta
seriously?
Get that. Oh, it's it's the best one out there. It's about 800 pages. It's a real thick one. It's called Saxophone Colossus, and it's Sonny. I'm telling you, he goes through his whole life. Really? My brother John just finished it. I'm kind of starting it.
Oh man, I'll order it now.
You see it out there? You see it? Saxophone Colossus.
Yeah, I'll write it down now. Oh shit! I love these biographies and stuff, man.
Okay. Oh, this is you won't. But I mean, he tells you about. I mean, he goes into depth into. He goes into his drug use, into his teeth problems, into all the record dates and all the stuff he can remember. It's a great book. Yeah.
Oh man, I'll order it now. Woo, that's beautiful.
It's excellent. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic, super. I'll jump it. I love reading.
I've got that one and the Mike Brecker one that It just came out recently. Came out too.
Yeah,
So,
I need the Brecker one as well. I spoke with someone the other day, and yeah.
But the one I was talking about is the workbook, right? There's the biography on Mike Brecker.
Yeah.
But then there's a workbook.
Workbook. Oh, okay. Shit. Okay.
The workbook is all his notes, like this stuff,
Man.
like
Yeah.
all his practice notes, and that just came. And that's digital. You know what? I can probably send you the link. Just give me a second here. Let me see if I
Oh,
can
please.
send you the link.
I'd love.